the most amazing things about the early history of the Salvation Army is the speed with which it spread around the world. One of the reasons being that if a Salvationist went abroad and there was no army there, they started one. William Gore and Edward Saunders did just that. Gore had been converted by General Booth and was known in Stepney as the Happy Milkman. And Saunders was a stonemason from Bradford. Well, in 1880, they held the very first Salvation Army meeting in Australia, underneath a gum tree in Adelaide's Botanical Gardens. And the first song that they sang is the one which opened the Salvation Army's campaign in Canada 2 years later. We are bound for the land of the pure and the holy.
We're bound for the land of the pure and the holy, the home of the happy, the kingdom of love. Ye wanderers from God in the broad road of folly, oh, say, will you go to the Eden of love? Will you go? Will you go? Will you go? Will you go? Oh, say, will you go to the Eden of love? In that blessed land, neither sighing nor anguish can breathe in the fields where the glorified rove. Ye heart-burdened ones who in misery languish, oh, say, will you go to the Eden of love? Will you go? Will you go? Will you go? Will you go? Oh, say, will you go to the Eden of love? Each face has a mansion prepared and all furnished, where promise the heart is so about to move. Its gates and its halls with glory are furnished, for say, will you go to the Eden of love? Will you go? Will you go? Will you go? Will you go? Oh, say, will you go to the Eden of love? Will you go? Will you go? Will you go? Will you go? Oh, say, will you go to the Eden of love? Oh, say, will you go to the Eden of love?
When the Salvation Army came to Switzerland, Geneva soon had a corps of solid, respectable citizens. But when Kate Booth, the general's daughter, arrived, she made it clear that these were not the people that the army had come to Switzerland to save. Kate had won a reputation as La Maréchale, the marshal, in the slums of Paris. When the poor people from the slums of Geneva, together with thieves and thugs and pimps and prostitutes, all flocked to hear her, polite society was scandalized and scared. My dear, mix religion with people like that and, oh, la la, anything can happen. So the army was denounced as a bunch of dangerous cranks and ordered out of Geneva. She made her way to Neuchâtel. This building used to be the Hotel Mont Blanc. When Kate preached here, over 1,000 people crammed inside to hear her. Outside, a riotous mob fought and shouted so they couldn't hear her. Windows were smashed, and the local Salvationists were pelted with mud. Word had come through from Geneva that the army was a money-making racket playing on the emotions of simple people. The mobs kept up their attacks, and the Grand Council of Neuchâtel responded by banning all Salvation Army meetings. In an act of calculated defiance, Kate Booth and 300 worshippers gathered here in this wood at Prise-Imer. As they started singing, the local prefect turned up, together with his inspector and 15 policemen. They stood with their hats in their hands, and they heard Kate talk of the army's mission to save the lost. At one point, one of the converts spotted a policeman and said, "He knows I was a jailbird, but Christ has changed all that." Well, at the end, the prefect stepped up. "I am sorry," he said. "Like everyone else, I have judged you without seeing you. Please do not blame me for doing my job." She was imprisoned in this cell in the ancient castle of Neuchâtel. Kate was at times so desolate that the devil seemed more real to her than God. But God was not to be shut out. Her people had followed her to sing below her window. With a full heart, Kate acknowledged them.
Alléluia, bon courage!
Alléluia, Maréchal! En avant! Bon courage! The trial of Kate Booth and 5 other Salvationists took place here in the small town of Boudry. The public prosecutor was somewhat sarcastic. "Even the Queen of England must submit to acts of Parliament, but of course she was not a Maréchal in the Salvation Army." Feelings were running high as Kate rose to defend herself. One woman at the back shouted out, "Give me a pitchfork, I will kill her myself!" Kate remained calm. The Queen of England would not be prosecuted for praying in a wood. People had hated those who prayed for them. Of course, when the truth was known, Switzerland would love the Salvation Army and justice would triumph. And so it did. Kate and her friends were acquitted. Within 6 years, all harassment ended and the army became like this traditional symbol of the Alphorn, an accepted and valued part of Swiss life. These are South American butterflies from French Guiana. These exotic papillons from paradise were once a passport out of hell, the French penal colony of Devil's Island. Here, 12,000 prisoners lived in conditions so horrific that men risked death by deliberately infecting themselves with leprosy or tuberculosis just for the relief of a hospital bed. Cruelly, a man completing, say, a 7-year sentence had to remain a further 7 years and then find his own fare back to France. But outside prison, without work or shelter, so-called libérés could only beg, steal, blaspheme, despair, and die. In 1928, a young Salvation Army officer arrived. He set the libérés to work, clearing the land to grow coffee, pineapples, bananas, and other crops. On his farms, a man could earn a ticket home in 18 months. Hopeless lives were transformed by 27-year-old Charles Péon. For 25 years, he exposed the horrors of Devil's Island until the French government closed it in 1953 for good. Now 86 and retired to Neuchâtel, he told me about the prisoners.
But at 6 o'clock in the evening, there were knock in their dormitory by a group of 80 without any guard from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. But in the night, it was something horrible, because without guard, the stronger, the bad one, the wicked one, take charge of the other. And when they open the dormitory in the morning, sometimes they find a man with a knife between the shoulder or with the bottom open. To help those men, we were forced to give them back hope. A man without hope is a body without soul. It's like an animal, in fact. Well, our work was to try to bring those men, those libérés, who were living like animals, forced by the government, by the law, to become men. And then, when they were men, we hope God will make them Christian.
You had these farms, but where did the butterflies come in?
That was with the old men, old libérés, or sick libérés. They couldn't work in the farm. Then we trained them to get all kind of insect, or butterfly, or snake. They come and bring them to the officer, and he taught them how to kill them properly, and we order and we prepare them and to send them to entomologists in United States or in France, and we get a lot of money to help those men.
I believe you had women officers there.
And this was a great responsibility. Can we send young wife among those people? Those men who have been without wife for years and years without white women there. Well, it was decided to take the risk, and we sent young officer married. The first one left France on honeymoon for Devil's Island. And I remember when this man saw this young officer in her white uniform, they were shocked in a way. She was like an angel of God arriving in the convict place. When she began to sing one of our hymns, you know, those beautiful songs there, you could hear a pin falling down.
You brought back home 4,000 men. After 25 years, how did you feel when Devil's Island was closed?
I put a wonderful, that's over. The whole thing fall from my shoulder. That was the end, and I was a man perfectly happy. Not for what I have done, but what God has done through us, little salvationists, women, children, without much possibility, like we are in the army.
Now, this was given you by a prisoner, wasn't it?
Yes, just when it was over, he made a carving, a beautiful head of Christ. He was an innocent man, and he expressed through this carving the sorrow, the dramatic sorrow of a man who spent all his life over there.
It's a face that asks, God, why must we suffer? A cry echoed by the Soweto songsters enacting the burden of slavery. In the 1880s, New York saw the invasion of Commissioner George Railton and 7 young Salvation Army lasses. Their first meeting was held in Harry Hill's Variety Theatre, a tobacco-spitting joint in a rough neighborhood controlled by mobsters and racketeers. They proved that even a bum could find the Lord, and many did. But as George Railton pushed on across the states, he met with one persistent obstacle, a refusal to allow the army to worship in the open air. The law was actually on the side of the army, even if the police were not, but it took a remarkable man to prove it. His name was Joseph Neshan Garabedban, otherwise known as Joe the Turk. Now, Joe was actually an Armenian, and he had a cobbler's shop in San Francisco right next door to Finnegan's saloon. All day long, Finnegan used to feed him with booze through a hole in the wall. "Here's another one for you, Joe." One day, Finnegan found that the hole was blocked with a Salvation Army almanac. Joe had joined the army. And what's more, he'd adopted his own unique style of uniform. He sported a blue, red, and yellow umbrella emblazoned with pictures of William Booth and the Statue of Liberty. Joe's aim was to be noticed. Whenever Salvationists fell foul of the law, Joe would arrive, parade up and down until he got himself arrested. Once in Los Angeles, the judge asked, "What's this man here for?" "For blowing a horn." "Blowing a horn? Every show and circus that comes to town blows horns. Get out of here, Joe, and blow your horn to the glory of God." At East Portland in Oregon, Joe painted his cell walls with slogans. The local judge burst in. "What's all this? Jesus is the drunkard's friend." Joe looked at him. "You're always drunk, Judge. He's the friend you need." The judge accepted Christ and carried the army's flag. Joe's most dramatic achievement occurred at Macomb, Illinois. Mayor Leitner was a Texan desperado whose gang had taken over the town. When he clapped the officers of the local Army Corps in jail, Joe arrived. Each day, Joe led a procession of Salvationists down to the courtrooms to cheer up the prisoners with songs and testimonies. Finally, Mayor Leitner lost his cool. He went out into the street and he punched the corps sergeant and drew his revolver. But now public opinion rallied behind Joe for having the courage to stand up to a corrupt regime. When Joe announced a monster procession to celebrate the release of the prisoners, Mayor Leitner and his cronies saddled up and rode out of town. Joe took over as mayor for 6 weeks until new officials could be sworn in, and the army captain, Captain Ivings, took over as the chief of the police. Joe won 57 battles in the courts and finally secured complete freedom of worship for the Salvation Army anywhere in the United States.
It's not enough to say it. You must sing it. You must shout it. If you've really got religion, you must tell the world about it. If God has gotten to you and your heart's as white as snow, don't keep the secret to yourself. Let everybody know. You're gonna demonstrate, you're gonna shout aloud, you're gonna get the message to the crowd. Let's have 1,000 trumpets and 1,000 drums, and let's be fools for Jesus until Jesus comes. You're gonna demonstrate, you're gonna shout aloud, you're gonna get the message to the crowd. Let's have 1,000 trumpets and 1,000 drums, and let's be fools for Jesus until Jesus comes. It's not enough to say it. You must write it. You must roar it. For what's the use of goodness if you bottle it and store it? Let's get out on the street, invade the tavern and the dive. Tell her there is a Savior, and that Savior is alive. You gotta demonstrate, you gotta shout aloud, you gotta get the message to the crowd. Let's have 1,000 trumpets and 1,000 drums, and let's be fools for Jesus until Jesus comes. You gotta demonstrate, you gotta shout aloud, you gotta get the message to the crowd. Let's have 1,000 trumpets and 1,000 drums, and let's be fools for Jesus until Jesus comes. Take the biggest hoarding, hide the biggest hall, wave the biggest banner, sound the trumpet call. Use the brightest music of the biggest man. Wake the world, wake Jesus until filled with men. You gotta demonstrate, you gotta shout aloud, you gotta get the message to the crowd. Let's have 1,000 trumpets and 1,000 drums, and let's be fools for Jesus until Jesus comes. You gotta demonstrate, you gotta shout aloud, you gotta get the message to the crowd. Let's have 1,000 trumpets and 1,000 drums, and let's be fools for Jesus until Jesus comes.
At the International Training College, I talked to Colonel John Larson, a man with an international pedigree.
I'm basically Swedish on my father's side, and when I think back on my grandparents, they've served in Sweden, in Finland, in Norway. In fact, they helped to pioneer the Army's work in Russia, and then in Czechoslovakia as well. On my mother's side, I come of British descent. My grandfather was just a 17-year-old lad living in Shoebury-Ness, helping, working for the Salvation Army. And they said, we need help in South America. And he offered, had a telegram one Sunday, said, be ready to sail on Tuesday. And so this 17-year-old lad sailed to South America. And there he met my grandmother. He worked in South America for 15 years, and then in Holland, in France, in China. So I suppose we do represent the International Army. My wife and I have also worked in South America.
That's quite a record. Is that reflected in the people who come here? How many students do you have in the college at the moment?
At the moment we have 130 students here, and it is the International Training College. A lot of territories, most territories have their own training colleges, but selected students come this way, and we have students from Brazil, from the Netherlands, from France, from Denmark.
Are there as many students nowadays as there used to be?
No, the intakes aren't as great. We are experiencing what I think most churches are experiencing these days. So in previous years, there would be more than 130 here at Denmark Hill.
Have you any idea why that might be?
Well, we scratch our heads and wonder. Obviously, there are many more avenues these days for young Christians to go and serve Christ in many different ways. There are young Salvationists who are offering their lives, and we are delighted to welcome them.
Is the army in any sense outdated?
I think the Salvation Army is marching on course. William Booth set it on its course, and obviously we have to change our tactics and our methods, and needs change, and the Salvation Army has to try to meet the need of the time. But when it comes to man's needs for Christ, of course, that remains always there.
And so does this question.
What does the Spirit say to the church? What does the Spirit say to you? If you have ears, then hear from the Spirit. Do what the Spirit tells you to. You love me less than you used to love me. I know your strength and your weakness too. Love me again as you used to love me. Do once again as you used to do. What does the Spirit say to the church? What does the Spirit say to you? If you have ears, then hear from the Spirit. Do what the Spirit tells you to. You have a wonderful reputation, far and away on your fingers spread. True, you are always so very busy, no one would guess that in fact you're dead.
You want the proudest of worship ever. I know you're neither cold nor hot. Look all at you and it makes you use it. You think you're rich, but you're not, you're not.
What does the Spirit say to the church? What does the Spirit say to you? If you have ears, then hear from the Spirit. Do what the Spirit tells you to. What does the Spirit say to the churches? What does the Spirit say to you? If you have ears, then hear from the Spirit. Do what the Spirit What does the Spirit say? What does the Spirit say? What does the Spirit say? What does the
William Booth's army took its place amongst others who were already at work across the world, followed in the wake of great pioneers like Baptist William Carey, who started work in India in 1799, and David Livingstone, the missionary explorer whose exploits in Africa, of course, became legendary. The Church of England had its missionary societies, and wherever new lands were discovered, the Roman Catholic Church sent in its priests and nuns. But Booth's soldiers seemed to bring a new and at times almost zany enthusiasm to the task. They were straightforward in what they said, and they were practical in what they did. And they were at one with all those who thought that God mattered, and that Christ was for anyone and everyone. And if you believe that, you can't keep it to yourself. And you can't just tell your next-door neighbor. You must tell the world, the world, the world, the world.
You've got to shout aloud.